Good afternoon, everyone. It is 1500 in the UK. It is, of course, the final Friday of the month, which means it's time for PMI Live. Great to have you with us. My name is Rich Seddon, Partner CEO at PMI, and I'm joined by my good friend and colleague Des Kelly, Director Consultant Partner at PMI. Des is going to be leading the session this afternoon. I'm in the facilitator's seat, which means I get the pleasure of firing questions at him. So on that note, please keep me busy so I can keep Des busy. Use the Q&A and chat functions if you're in the live session. If you've joined us on one of the live streams on LinkedIn, on YouTube and Facebook, you can still register for the interactive session by going to pmi.co.uk/webinars, where you can still hop on in and join us here, which you will need to be in order to join the polls and the exercises and the discussions in the main session. That said, great to have everyone with us. Without further ado, Des, would you like to introduce yourself for those of you not met you before, and also give us an idea of what you've been working on since we last saw you in PMI Live?
Right, so I think I'm now in my 20th year as a PMI PMIer. I've been over the last, since I was last here, I think we've been working with many organisations on a variety of subjects, some really, really great organisations I've had the pleasure of working with. Many sectors, some not-for-profit, some are purely commercial and normal businesses, some on national infrastructure, those sort of things. So it's been really good working with leadership teams on helping them develop their strategies, and probably more fun working with teams to help deliver the projects within those strategies. And I think our particular role is where we help and facilitate the organizations to self-learn so they can get on and do it themselves.
So where's the role of strategy in all this, Des, given that today is all about reinvigorating strategy? Well,
let's have a look at what we're going to be covering today then.
That'd be great.
Good. Well, it's what we're covering today. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to recap on a couple of the points that we covered off in our 2020 webinar, which if anybody is interested and you want to know where to go, you can go to the PMI website and just go to the Knowledge Hub, and you'll be able to pick that up and just go through that, and you can check how much difference there is between this and that.
We'll pop a link into the chat shortly for that specific one, but the Knowledge Hub, as Des mentioned, is where to find all. This is episode 103, so somewhere out there's 102 episodes waiting for you, all indexed and available. So you're going to refer back to some of that, Des, but it doesn't matter if you didn't see that one. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. And because what I'm going to do is because, in the time since then, we've worked with lots of organizations, and every single day is a school day for us. We learn something new every single day. And so what have we learned in that intervening period? One of the things is that's become abundantly clear is the criticality of continually evolving our strategies. And therefore, the subject for today would be strategy deployed with agility, and we'll be looking at that. And we'll be looking at the biggest risks with strategy deployed with agility, and how can we avoid that? Because strategy is all about making those big decisions about what it is we are going to do and what it is we're not.
So fantastic.
I think one of the things that we wanted to do before we go and get too far into it is just to get everybody who's engaged on the calls, just to actually take part in a little poll we've got. So you can see there's a poll appeared on my screen, and but through the wonder of technology, something's going to happen.
There you go. Jamil is in the glamorous assistant seat today, and I can see he's successfully launched that poll. Thank you very much, Jamil. So on the screen, you have a question. How often does your organization revisit and update its strategic plan or plans? Annually, 2 to 3 years, every 5 years, only when there is significant change in the market. We don't have a formal strategic plan. Or maybe there's something else. If there is, put it in the chat. I'd love to hear from you on that. And let's take a temperature check of what we've got and who we've got in the room. And if you also got any observations on any of this, particular experience that you have with how your organization does this, I say annually or within each of these categories, let us know. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the things that work really well for your organizations? We'd love to share some of that and explore that with you. What are the things that don't go so well? Because critically, they're often our key learning points. So I can see responses are coming in, which always encourages me, and I relax a little bit when people are able to see things on screen. By far and away, and I don't think I'm surprised by this, Des, we've got annually coming out way on top.
That's good.
The classic annual cycle. And a lot of that, I guess, is driven by traditional budgeting programs, I guess, and also the fiscal year. That's certainly your experience, I'm guessing, Des?
Most certainly, and I suppose that's a bit of a change from where we have been, because I think if we had asked that question 4 or 5 years ago, as we did, the response was slightly different, because every 2 to 3 years was a significant contributor back then. So that's quite that's something's changed, and I think that's interesting. That's changed, and I suppose it could therefore pose the question to us: is that okay? So we normally do it annually, but is that sufficient?
And it's funny. This has just prompted me to think, Des, because our own internal within PMI and Capella, our own cycle is actually not set to a specific time period. Typically, it's around about 18 months to 2 years, but it's not on a fixed recurring cycle. It's when the current plan has been exhausted and needs a refresh. It's just made me think. I wonder what our own team would have how they'd have responded to that question. It'd be very interesting to see that.
Indeed.
Okay.
Indeed.
Great.
Okay.
So we've got people generally in an annual cycle, with then the next bias being towards 5 years, which are quite radically different. So let's bear that in mind. As I say, let us know any comments, observations, what works well on that as we progress.
Excellent. Excellent. So in which case then, let's have a look at setting the context for our strategy. Now, one of the things I would like to do as well, so we've got a large number of people listening in, and some will be coming from normal commercial enterprises where they are engaging in the marketplace in a competitive environment. But there's also, looking down the list of them, a very significant number of people who are working in organizations who are not in competition with anything else. They could be healthcare, they could be local government, they are organizations from charities. And therefore, I want to ensure, and Rich, if you keep chiding me on this during the course of this would be really good, is that what is the difference between a strategy for a competitive environment, and what's the subtle difference between one which is a collaborative environment?
Sure.
And so there's a subtle difference in there. But for all environments, one thing I would say is that we need to understand what the key roles of leaders are when we come to about developing strategy. And the graphic that's appeared on the screen is one that's been around in PMI probably for about 10, 15 years. It's definitely appeared in Jane Seddon's and Jan Gillett's book, Work in the Grain. And I use this because it's a really useful little model and it breaks down to 3 categories, really: leading the system, sponsoring projects, and managing processes. And those are the 3 roles of leaders, and they look something like this when we start to evaluate strategy. So from a strategic point of view, we need to understand the needs and expectations of the customers and stakeholders, and as a leadership team, design the system that will deliver that. Now, that's setting the aim of the system. The other one was when we understand our system and we are monitoring the performance of our system, both internally and externally in the greater world, then we need to be able to sponsor projects that will change or improve that system in line with the changing expectations of customers, stakeholders. And that's effectively measuring where we are and responding back to the changing needs. And then the third role was, in reality, managing the day-to-day operations of the system to obtain the best balance of efficiency, effectiveness, and flexibility. And that's where we get the balance focus when we're looking at our strategy. So let's just reflect quickly Go on,
And
Rich.
there's just two questions just occurred to me while I'm thinking about that balance and the dimensions. Where would you see the split of the agility comment that you made up front here, the agility kind of concept against these three? Is it across all three or what?
It's definitely across all three, because
Okay.
the agility bit. I'm going to come and explain what I think agility is in a moment. But being agile is actually being able to respond to circumstances appropriately as fast as you possibly can. And I will say appropriately, because there has to be a difference between agility and just bouncing around. So yeah, I see it across all three.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. So let's have a quick look then and just go over what actually is strategy. And Chandler actually defines strategy as the determination of the basic long-term goals of an enterprise, irrespective of what that enterprise is, and the adoption of a course of action and the allocation of resources necessary for carrying out those goals. And one of the things that we spoke of in 2020, which is still true today, and it's one thing that is probably the first thing that rolls off my tongue whenever I'm talking to anybody about the development of their strategy. Strategy is about making deliberate choices on what we are going to do as an organization. But there's a counter to that, because it's possibly more importantly, what is it we're not going to be doing? Because there's always far too much stuff to do. And we have to have leadership teams who are clear about what the objectives are, what the vision of the business is, and they understand the resources available to them and are making choices about what it is they're going to be doing. Strategy is simply about making choices. So if we have a look, what is strategy then in just listed, is actually the description of where the organization is trying to get to in the long term. That's really setting the strategic direction. It's also the determination of which markets should a business compete in, or if it's not a commercial business, what was the organization created for, and what type of activities are involved in those situations. It's about establishing how the business will perform better than its competition in those markets, or how the organization can better deliver its purpose. And we want to be looking then at what resources, the skills, the assets, the finance, all those sorts of stuff that we're going to need in order to be able to compete or to deliver. And we really want to have a clear picture on what external environmental factors are affecting the organizations to compete, the organization's ability to compete or to deliver those things that they need to do. And part of the strategy has to be about really understanding those environmental factors. And then I guess the last point on that would be, what are the values and expectations of the stakeholders who have an interest and power over our organization? What are those? Do we know what those are? And so that really is a summary of what a strategy is all about. And that probably leads us now to our next poll, where we have a different question. So when we start to talk about strategies, I'll be really interested, Rich, in trying to get a feel for the response to the question, which area do you find most challenging when implementing new or updated strategies?
Yeah, so the options there are securing stakeholder buy-in, aligning with organizational goals, managing the change process, monitoring and adjusting the strategy, and lack of resources and tools. Again, maybe it's something else. Let us know in the chat. Add those comments in there. So have a think for a moment about those. Des, in terms of those selections that you've put forward, what was your thinking on those? Why those ones? Why those options?
I think it really was. They are each independently and on their own things that I have experienced our clients struggling with.
Okay.
And I was interested because I'm interested in seeing, well, as you see things, and I'm trying to avoid confirmation bias in this one here, because I tend to start seeing the same thing. So I'm really interested really to get a feel from our delegates on this call as to what they feel. because they're seeing the facts from where they're sat and from their world, and so I'll be really interested in that to alleviate this potential bias I may have.
Yeah, so I think we've got people responding here. So we can see an equal split at the moment between securing stakeholder buy-in and managing the change process. Then we've got aligning organisational goals and the other options following up behind. I'm going to give my personal response to that first of all. I would have expected in response to those options, I was thinking that managing the change process would have come out significantly ahead. And that's interesting to see that it's kind of that equally split with securing stakeholder buy-in. What are your perspectives?
It's interesting. I think I get it. Securing stakeholder buy-in is an interesting one, but is not the predominant one I see. In fact, the one that I see as probably being the one which has the biggest impact on strategies failing is actually answer 5.
Okay. Yeah.
Where we have a whole raft of things that have to be done, but the organization doesn't consider the resources, the tools that are required in order to get those things done. Now, as I say, that could be confirmation bias. Is that because when I see things not going well, it's obviously because people haven't done anything. But it's a balance of the other things as well. But certainly for me, that's where I was seeing potentially one of the blind spots.
Yeah, indeed, and I often describe that answer 5, lack of resources and tools, where we see that it's strategic deployment and change using the power of hope alone.
That's a really great description.
It's one I use it a lot. I'm aware of that for regular journalists on here, but it's true.
Yep. Yeah, hope alone won't deliver your strategy. That's very good. So, in which case then, in the avoidance of hope, what can we do? And so, let's have a look at the deployment of a responsive strategy. And this is the subject matter really of identifying the importance of continuously evolving our strategies. And I'll be honest with you, I'm lacking originality here. I've called it Agile strategy deployment. And whether that's a good idea or not, I'm not too sure, but let's have a work and see how it goes.
It's too late now, let's run with it.
Oh, it is, yeah. So anyway, what is Agile strategy? Right, Agile strategy is an approach to strategic analysis, planning and deployment that emphasizes flexibility, responsiveness and adaptability to change. One of the reasons why it's become important is because the world today is changing so rapidly, and there are so many significant things that can impact upon our business and the world in which our business operates in. We need to be almost permanently switched on to that changing world, and therefore the Agile view came about. Now, Agile, as everybody probably on this call knows, is a methodology derived from the principles of Agile software development. But as everyone is also probably aware, it's been increasingly applied in business management and organizational strategies to address that very dynamic nature of today's business environment. And sometimes I would have to say the interpretation of Agile means just dashing around, changing, doing things quickly without thought or something like that. It is absolutely not that. So being Agile isn't about bouncing from post to post. It's about having a structured, fast response mechanism to the changing world we're operating in, where those changes are considered and applied with thought. And I think it's going to be something else. So in getting to that then, what we have in Agile strategy is iterative analysis, iterative choice selection, and iterative deployment. And it's an interesting one, Rich, because I know something we do in PMI and Capella is where we have regular strategic meetings. And whilst you said, the whole thing may not get switched over, in 18 months, but I am conscious of the fact that we are all mindful about that things are progressed and developed in iterative cycles. allowing for regular reassessment and adjustment of those particular goals and objectives. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree.
It is where you can get short-term objectives and goals are set, but those short-term objectives and goals have to be reviewed and adjusted based on the outcomes and changing conditions, and ensuring that they are aligned to the lighthouse and the overall direction and aims of the business. And that's going to be crucial. That aims of the business should be customer focused. They should be continuous engagement with customers and stakeholders to ensure the strategy aligns with their needs and their expectations. And a strategy without involving your customers or the stakeholders is a fast route to failure. So customer focus has to be there. We need to invest in feedback loops that are there to establish and gather insights and make those necessary adjustments. But I'm going to say something about those necessary adjustments towards the end, because you have to be really careful that the adjustments are appropriate. Now, this one here, I probably should have had this in one of the questions in the polls, which is about cross-functional collaboration. So an agile strategy demands cross-functional collaboration across the various departments and teams in the organization to ensure a holistic approach to strategy development and execution. All too frequently, I see strategies which are held, if you like, by the marketing teams and the team of leaders in the middle, and don't involve everybody else working in the organization. Strategy is not going to work in that case.
Well, and what a waste of capacity and talent and resources.
Absolutely, because if we can encourage a culture of shared responsibility on those things and collective problem solving, we will energize our strategy. And I think people will be amazed just how influential and impactful that can be. And then this thing about incremental development is one of the things, is breaking down the strategy into smaller manageable parts. And this is really what Agile does, or projects that can be completed incrementally, which are moving you along the line to your stated objectives. And that will allow us to test our actions and test for learning at each increment, so we can make a judgment and say, what were we predicting, and did we get it? And if we don't get what we thought we were going to get, we can stop and just reflect. And that will avoid or reduce the risk of having a large-scale failure by the time you do something. So keeping it dynamic. And then there's something about adaptive learning, where it's an emphasis on learning from both successes and failures. So not everything, people may be surprised, but everything that we do in PMI and Capella on our strategic things, sometimes they don't go entirely as we planned. But we can actually learn from that experience, because it probably tells us more than when it works. And therefore, regular retrospectives and reviews to identify what is working and what needs challenging or improvement is going to be important. We need to have transparency and visibility. And that means that keeping all the stakeholders informed about the progress, the challenges, and any changes to the strategy. And use the tools and practices like the huddle boards we coach in, dashboards, and regular updates on various means are the things that we need to do across the whole organization to maintain transparency of our strategy and its progression. And coming to the last couple of points on this one then, and this, Rich, was the point I think that you made. What a waste, I think you said, when we don't engage our people. Empowerment and autonomy. Empowering the teams in our business to make decisions and take ownership of their parts of the strategy is hugely, hugely beneficial to the organization. It's also hugely beneficial to our employees, and it really does help them feel as though they are part of a bigger family with one aim and one objective, and they're all traveling in the same direction. So really do focus on that. And by encouraging autonomy while ensuring alignment with the overall strategic vision, that's what we need to do. Then embracing change. We often say that change is one of the hardest things, but what we should view and look at changes. And I know it pretty much, this is something that always gets trotted out when we talk about change, but let's view changes in the marketplace or internal environment as opportunities rather than threats. Now, that's far easier said sometimes than done, because human beings by and large are not overly keen on change, and therefore we need to have good ways of actually dealing with it. And therefore
usually fearful of it, for that matter.
Because too many times it hasn't probably worked in their favor. So being prepared to pivot and adapt the strategy as needed to stay competitive or relevant or online is going to be really important. But I'm going to be, again, come back and put a caution on that. Pivoting and adapting to the strategy needs to be done with deep consideration. But by applying the principles, the organization can develop strategies that are more resilient to change, better aligned with customer and stakeholder needs, and are capable of delivering the continuous value that you've got, whether or not you are a for-profit business or a not-for-profit business. Doesn't matter. Now, I shall be making reference to these two models. It's hardly surprising, but I'm going to make reference to these two models. So just so that you know, as I'm going to make reference to them, the one I'm going to show is the one on the right-hand side, which is Plan, Do, Study, Act, which is our Deming cycle, which came from the works of Deming towards the end of his career in the early 1990s. But the one many of you will see, you'll certainly see it in all the ISO books, is Plan, Do, Check, Act, just to actually say both models coexist in the world of continuous improvement. Both are exactly the same. They have the same genesis. So I shall be using that. So this is where I reflect back on one of the things we talked about in 2020, which is the 3 phases of strategy, and it hasn't changed much. And it is that the 3 phases are strategic analysis, strategic choice, and strategic implementation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those. But they are the strategy, the 3 phases of strategy, for those that are familiar with the viewing the business as a system, are what we refer to as leadership processes. They have to be undertaken by the leadership on behalf of the organization, because if it is not they that do it, who will? So that's the 3 phases of strategy, and that's where it needs to be embedded in the system. Our business systems, whether your business system is a for-profit or not for-profit, doesn't matter. So let's have a look at the first of these then, which is going to be strategic analysis. Now, strategic analysis is all about analysing the strengths of the organisation's position and understanding the important external factors that may be influencing that position. So first we need to understand, is our business as a system? And if you've got that, but then if I just rotate that back in and we say all our businesses or all our organizations, be they in healthcare, be they in research, whether they be in local government or whether they are a commercial entity, doesn't really matter. All of our organizations exist in a world, and that world can be defined by 2 principal environments: the primary environment, which is next to us. And this is, if you're in a commercial environment, it's where, for example, if a competitor lowers their price, it has an impact upon you. If a competitor goes out of business, it has an impact on you. If customers become sensitive to something, it has an impact upon you. So the primary environment is actually a 2-way conversation, and we need to be able to analyze that primary environment, because we can make our competitors do things and they can make us do things. We can cause our customers to do and think things in a particular way, and they can cause us to think and do things in a particular way. So that's the primary environment, and it exists, and we will need to have a method of understanding that primary environment. The next environment then is the macro environment. Now the macro environment is the bigger world thing, and this is a one-directional impact here. The macro environment tends to impact our organizations, and we really can't have a significant impact upon it. So the type of things, and I remember it was present in the time back in 2020. We had, unfortunately, we had the very present thing of COVID back in that day, and COVID was having a huge impact on all of our organizations, but our organizations could not necessarily impact upon that, and that's why it's a one-way. So we need a slightly different lens to look at for the macro environment. So during that time, what we then says, right, if that's the strategic analysis, you now see I've put that little model in the top sphere there. And there are a few tools that we can actually use for monitoring that. The ones we advocated back then were PESTLE for understanding parts of the macro environment, still relevant today, still used, still taught in business schools. We also touched on Porter's 5 forces model, which I've modified our thinking on a little bit now, and I'm going to say a little bit more about it in a little while. But that's a technique for identifying the forces that affect the level of competition in an industry for a commercial entity. But if you're not a commercial entity, there still has to be tools or methods to look and investigate that particular environment. So one of the ones I've selected is this 3 aims that I've put it in here, 3 aims framework. That's a technique for establishing the strategic requirements from a non-competitive environment. I can say a little bit more about it because it actually came from healthcare initially. But the point we're actually making here is that you will need to have a mechanism for it. And I don't have a favorite tool, but it's one bit of coaching I would give you is you need to stop and think about that primary environment. And then there's the tool we've got, which is the SWOT analysis, which is just about everybody knows the SWOT analysis. And ironically, on the last 2 occasions I've seen it presented to me, I believe they were wrong. And I'm going to explain why they were wrong in a little while. So just have a quick look at Porter's 5 forces model and as a way of actually doing that. That's Porter's model. I'm not going to say anything more about it other than the fact that it evaluates the things like bargaining power of suppliers, threat of new entrants, threat of substitute products, and you can see the others yourself. And if that's not appropriate for you, you can modify that. But what we're looking at doing is having a model that will help us interrogate and understand that 2-way primary environment. The environment that we can influence if we take an action, and it can influence us if it takes an action. What are those things? Porter's is a really good starting point for it. The other model I spoke of was the triple aim framework, which is an alternative to the Porter's model because Porter's definitely does not work in a healthcare environment. And I know there are people on today's session who are healthcare organizations and or local government organizations, and so we need to think about that. This is the one that is in the healthcare, and so the 3 aims framework is a study of the experience of the care an individual have if they become ill and have to have access to the to healthcare. The population health is an understanding and a study of the general population health, because are we just fixing people or are we trying to actually prevent things going wrong? And the per capita cost is not how much it costs the healthcare system, but what is the cost to society of poor health or good health and those sort of things. That's a model that comes from someone that we knew well, unfortunately no longer with, Tom Nolan. A really useful model. I advocate people have a look at it if you have a chance. So the point I make here, and then Rich, please ask your question, is this: we need to consider the best way to evaluate the 2-way response mechanism for your primary environment. I've presented 2 models here. There may be others. I'll be quite happy to hear about it.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point I was going to make, Des. I mean, the purpose of all of these models are, as Des keeps using this language, lenses. They are potential lenses that you can pick up and look at the world in, trying to understand your different scenarios and different situations, because no organization and no environment is exactly the same. And therefore, no one model, no matter how widely used, will do everything that you need. So the purpose of this kind of discussion is to try and present these different lenses that you can pick up and use and see what you get from them.
Yeah, and be adaptive. Don't be tied to it. Use your own imagination, your own insights, your own knowledge about these sort of things. It can be really very liberating. So that'd be good. Now, the final model then we spoke of was PESTLE's, which frankly has been around for probably 40 years or more, I suppose, and actually is quite useful. And it's the one we use for the macro environment. So just having a quick look at that then, just a quick refresh on that. Something like Porter's or Triple Aim are things we use for the primary environment, and PESTLE is the one we use for the macro environment. But that doesn't mean you can't go and select your own tools. Have a look at these and see where they would work. The other one then is the SWOT analysis that comes in, and I said a little earlier that I actually think that on the last 2 occasions I saw this, they hadn't been well done. maybe I didn't say it quite like that. But what I want you to do is to recognize that the SWOT analysis was deliberately created to take a view of what is helpful to the organization and its strategy and what is harmful to the organization and its strategy. And that's the two columns you've got. Then we take an internal view of strengths and weaknesses and an external view of opportunities and threats. And just a bit of guidance in here is, in this one here, is all of the little models I've spoken of and all the ones that you are going to develop are to populate that external view. That's what we'll use it for. Okay, so let's look then at strategy creation and strategy deployment. So when leaders have set a direction, they then need to create what we refer to as the magnetic north. And this again is a slide I used in the last presentation. So if we've got the two little triangles here, is this from everyone trying to do their very, very best, doing something, but maybe the energy dispersed because some of the things aren't aligned, to getting everybody in the second triangle, everybody aligned and everybody heading in the same direction. And that's the whole purpose about a deploy strategy, is getting everybody all moving in the same way. As part of our conversation for doing that, one of the things we identified was I'm showing now the 7-step Hoshin planning model, the planning cycle. You can use other planning models. You don't have to use Hoshin Canary to deploy a strategy. We just happen to find it useful. We have this, but actually internally, we do not use Hoshin Canary because we have a slightly different approach to deployment. We use a tree model for doing it. It works brilliantly well, but we've been asked to consider Hoshin planning as part of this, so that's why it's in here. Now, the Hoshin planning cycle, for those of you who are familiar with it, is a 7-step process. The first 3 steps look at strategy development. The subsequent steps deal with strategy deployment. So if I was to take my little 3-stage model and apply it, actually what it does, it covers strategic choice and strategy implementation. Notice it doesn't cover strategic analysis. So for those of you stepping out on doing Hoshin, it misses the strategic analysis bit, so you need to be aware of that. So strategic analysis and strategic choice and strategy implementation, all subject to plan, do, study, act, look something like this. So we want to be able to do the strategic analysis, strategic choice, and strategic implementation, developing theories about how we can improve our organization. That's where your Hoshin Canary model will fit in, and it is through the strategy implementation do we gain alignment and getting everybody moving in the same direction. Now, strategy deployment requires us to have a vision and mission, which needs to be clear and compelling. The strategic choices, the decisions I've spoken about, the end goals, being clear about what they are, and then what means to an end do we have. Now, I wanted to put that up because when we come to the development of a responsive strategy, these things are all in play. So the importance of continually evolving our strategy, and I'm going to come to our PDSA model now and just actually touch on how it works, because we're using PDSA in our strategy. As most PMIs and people associated with us know, we always start with study. And in a strategic context, we're looking at doing our strategic analysis, understanding our customers, marketplaces, whatever it's going to be. Then forming, as Act 1, our initial hypotheses or theories, working out what it is we need to accomplish, how will we know that any change is an improvement, and making a prediction from it. From that, we'll create a plan, selecting the priorities, agree the actions. We'll then do something, and that will move us there for learning. And we can now compare what we actually had with the story and going round. And that goes round and round. And that's perpetual learning by PDSA. I wanted to show that, Rich, because I've got a little modification to it now, specifically for strategic issues. And it's based on this. The first study that we do when we're doing our strategic analysis is something we call an inductive study, where we gain knowledge and awareness of our environment. Now, there are 2 types of studies which are available to us, inductive and deductive. They go back to the 15th and 16th century themselves. Galileo was induction, and Francis Bacon was deduction. But here, induction, we observe, study, and experiment. We analyze, and we come up with ideas and theories. And these become the choices we've got. That allows us to select our priorities, plan and define the actions for our strategy, and make a prediction as to its impact and what we might expect from our intervention. Then obviously we've got to do something. So we deploy the actions. Having deployed those actions, we need to now start to study again. And this is where we now come back and we have the other type of deductive element to it. So this here is that we had a theory, we put it into place, we got to study what happened and what's our conclusions. And so when we go to the subsequent studies, we're doing both induction and deduction. Induction of what's changing in our marketplace, and secondly, what impact did we have on it, and what activity, how are our theories about our actions, how are they working? At pace, I'm just going to show you this model. This is a standard model we use, because it's really important when we're developing a strategy that we know what it is we're trying to accomplish. It's probably even more important that we actually know what direction improvement is and how will we know, and then we can start to establish the changes that we will make. Now, again, that's the 3-question model, which came from Nolan and Provost. The same Nolan, by the way, that did the 3 aims model, which and I was intrigued when I researched that first. So these are a universal question at any time. They demand theories and prediction before action, and we do it as rapidly as possible, providing you have an answer to 2. So if I bring back our PDSA model, we have this situation here where our studies, our macro environment studies and the use of our pest SWOT analysis fits into the studies. That enables us now to actually use the thinking about what is it we're going to do, developing our theories, and what is it we're trying to accomplish. Then we can go to plan and do. Now, the first part of the plan is the first step in the Hoshin model, and the do is actually the strategy deployment. And if we were to look at that in a linear way, that's how it looks. Study first, act, plan, then do. Now that's counterintuitive to the way it's normally said, which is plan, do, study, act. But what happens on subsequent years is this, is that during the do phase of any strategy, we are studying, we're acting, we're doing the things, and we're planning again. Because we should always be actively doing something to deliver our strategy. Now, the iteration between this and the agile bit between it is making sure that as we are doing, we are continually reviewing. And so that's how it fits in. And you could then go again and show it like that, where we start again in the do. So we need to be actively studying our markets and responding to it and understanding how we are doing our work in order to ensure that we have a continually evolving strategy. The cycle time or the takt time between these could be 12 months, could be 18 months, could be 2 years. But whatever happens is you must be mindful of the changes that are occurring on a day-to-day basis and responding and delivering to that. There's some risks associated with that, Rich. That's the big issue I've got, because Agile strategy is an approach to strategic analysis. And as we said, it's about being nimble, but you have to be careful, because the big risks about it, and this is when people who do not have a sense of what Agile really is, the risks become this, is that we end up continually changing direction, hopping from one thing to the next, butterflying from one little flower to the next, right? And that's a big risk. That's a big risk, because that will cause us to stop, then start initiatives, or start and then stop initiatives. It could cause the organization to become dizzy because it's got overload and over sensory load because of all these things that are going on. So you've got to be mindful of that. So management also appear to be unable to make up their mind. So you've got to have some risks in that. And all that leads to, if you're not careful, an appearance of lack of constancy of purpose. And those of you who are familiar with our background, that's a Deming thing. That's the first of his 14 points, is lack of constancy of purpose. So the question is going to have to be, how do we ensure that whilst our strategy is agile and flexible and responsive, that we do have constancy of purpose?
So there's a great quote, Des, from Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney. That's I'm paraphrasing probably, but it's something along the lines of your strategy is only as good as your ability to articulate it. And in terms of the constancy of purpose, well, that's key, isn't it? Because if you're flip-flopping and jumping from one thing to the next, how could you possibly articulate it?
Yeah, and it's very disorientating for an organization. The people working in an organization is because it does give that sense, as I said, there's that, well, the leadership here really don't know, they can't make their mind up what it is they're doing. The world does change quickly around us, that is true, but we've got to remember, as leaders, we have the choice to either bounce around or to slowly consider. So what the risk avoidance techniques I'm going to advise here are this. Check when you are doing your continually monitoring the primary and macro environments. Then ask this, what has changed? Mm-hmm. Why has it changed? Where has it changed? And when did it change? And pose those questions because they're going to illuminate your theory generation. And then you can pose 2 H's. How does it impact on our current plan? And how should we respond? And we need to have our continual monitoring going to ensure that the answers to those questions are up to date and relevant. So be really conscious of the fact is that it's the studying of the environment that will give us rise to an agile strategy. And so some things to do to avoid risk avoidance in this case is be certain that you have a clear vision and mission that everyone can align to, and that is specifically focused for your organization's needs, whether you're in a not-for-profit or for a commercial organization. That clear vision and mission should give the lighthouse the direction in which you are traveling. And that probably in itself won't change that dramatically in the short term. Be clear on the strategic objectives, the choices you have made. That's both things we are going to do and what it is we're not going to do, because it is those choices that you have made that you need to be challenging on a regular basis. Are they progressing in the right way? So our agile thing of setting small scale steps, be really clear about the longer term choices you've made and making sure your steps are taking you in that direction, and understand how the things may have changed around you. Define your strategy planning process. Now, I've given you a model for strategy planning, which is the 3 little spheres that we've got of strategic analysis, strategic choice, and strategic deployment. But make sure you've got your planning process, because without a process, you will be drawn to just simply doing tasks, doing things in response. You need to tie it into a rigorous process. You do need to implement strong governance. You do need to know, have the things we've been doing be making any difference? It's answering the second question. How will we know that any change is an improvement? You can only get that through strong governance. This one here is embrace flexibility without overcommitment to it. So the agile strategy isn't about saying you must be flexible and you must be changing. Embrace it, but don't be overcommitted to it. If there is no obvious need to redirect, your direction is probably appropriate. Ensure that the stakeholder engagement and communication are maintained at all times. That's really, really important. And then use correctly analyzed data to guide decisions. Now, for those of you that have joined me on previous webinars, you know that I've got one of these things is that it is alleged that Deming said, "In God we trust, everybody else brings data." And I feel I've modified that by saying, "In God we trust, everybody else brings data that has been correctly analysed," because you'd be amazed how many organisations make bad decisions because they didn't understand how to analyse the data. So make sure the data you have is correctly analysed, and that alone will guide your decisions. Have a good balance between innovation and strategic stability. So it is good to innovate, but don't create a turmoil, don't create a whirlwind of things which creates strategic instability, where people are uncertain of the direction, uncertain how they contribute, uncertain how they may be involved. And regularly reassess and reconfirm your strategy. Now, one of the questions I asked right at the beginning was, how long or how frequently do you address your strategy? And I think most people said annually, and many said
5 yearly.
5 yearly. And I think that's appropriate, and I think your organization should do it. But every month we should be reassessing and reconfirming our strategy, ensuring that the actions that we've got today are being completed, and indeed that they are still appropriate. That allows us to make a judgment then as to where we need to be. And then the final one I would say in the top 10 of risk avoidance is the one we spoke about, which is strive for constancy of purpose, and do not be led astray by the desire to be agile. So the summary of all that then, Rich, and then if there's any more questions, that'd be good.
Yeah, we've got one specific one, Des, which I'll just deal with before you do the wrap up here. It's a question about appropriateness of strategy, and if a strategy is looking at analysis and reduction of waste and errors, etc., does it have to be entire company focused, or can you focus on smaller areas of the business, such as departments, etc.? I mean, I'll start and then put that one to you. My answer would be a resounding yes, but I'd add one point, which Des will build on in a minute, no doubt. As long as the things you're working on are aligned to the whole company strategy, otherwise you'll be sub-optimizing the system. That would be my addition. Des, how do you respond to that question?
I'll simply respond to this one, is that if you've got an organization of 150 people, all 150 people should be doing something towards the strategy. Mm-hmm. And the art of actually deploying the strategy is to understand how people can be involved. And it could well be you're in certain areas that say, right, if we need to be more efficient at doing this, and therefore we need to eliminate waste. And that might be in a particular area where the area of specialism is. But every single function plays a role in the business system. Every single element of that business system delivers the strategy. And therefore, if every element of the system delivers the strategy, those people working in the system should be invited and permitted to participate in that change. And if you exclude people from it, they'll get on and do something. They will do something. Is it aligned to your strategic objectives?
Yeah. Because
if it isn't, there's energy being wasted that could be better utilized.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an overlapping question also being asked by someone else, which is around who should be involved. I mean, you've answered who should be involved in the execution of strategy because it's the whole organization. It's always an interesting question about who should be involved in the development of strategy, because thrown too wide, it can be a recipe for chaos. Too narrow, it can be a recipe for disaster, because it's a small group of people's view of the world, and inevitably no one person can know everything. So there's no clean answer to that one, I would say.
No, what I would say is, though, and it was a question I was asked yesterday, and if I look at this one here, is if we look at this study of the microenvironment, there should be people in the organization who are paid to be aware of this. This isn't what, if we've got master black belts or if we've got continuous improvement leaders in here, I would not expect the continuous improvement leaders or the facilitators to be engaged in that activity, but someone in the system must be. And then you involve everybody else in. So does the organization have the ability to listen to the marketplace continuously is something which the organization will have to set itself up for. It will need to have those. Okay, so summary on that then, I think, on this as we go, is remembering the integration of the phases, the strategy analysis, strategic choices, and strategy deployment. And effective strategic management requires a seamless integration of those three phases continually. And to accomplish that, you'll need continuous feedback and iteration from the marketplace into the organization. So continuous feedback and iteration are essential as organizations need to adapt to the changes in both the internal environment and the external environment. And then hopefully by systemically analyzing the current situation, making informed strategic choices, and rigorously implementing those strategies, organizations will have and can achieve sustainable competitive advantage, or if it's not a competitive environment, long-term success of that organization.
Thank you, Des. Excellent. So if you could, thank you for that, Des. And anyone's got any additional questions, please do let us have them. Just before we finish, there's a few additional things I'd like to cover. If you just flick onto the next slide for me, Des, that'd be great. Earlier this week, we learned the sad news that Professor Tom Johnson, a great friend of PMI's, had died. Tom, as I say, was a great friend of ours, a true leading light in the systems thinking arena, a rare thing in someone with an accountancy background who challenged his own practice and that of his profession. Tom won the Deming Medal in 2007. We were very honoured to be able to host him and his wonderful wife Elaine in 2006 and again in 2008. Tom's books, Relevance Lost, Relevance Regained, and for me, the seminal one, which is Profit Beyond Measure, are all still in print and all still available. Profit Beyond Measure particularly still has lots of resonance and relevance to the systems thinking improvement practice. And as I say, we're very, very sad to have lost such a leading light and leading mind in this arena. Thanks, Des. And in case you hadn't noticed, the Goals to Results Conference, our inaugural Goals to Results Conference, is happening on the 25th of September. It's up there somewhere. It's there. It's on the screen right here as well. You'll find full details and the agenda. The agenda is looking fantastic, folks. It's published at pmi.co.uk. G2R. You can scan that there. What's that? As a QR code. You can scan the QR code to find the full details. On that note, we'd like to say thank you so much for joining us. Des, thank you very much for presenting today, and thank you for the contents. Thanks for the contributions. On that note, have great weekends, everyone. Thank you again for joining PMI Live.